I gave HOA 10 seconds to leave my gate. They called cops. Cops told them to leave. 28 years in the JAG Corps taught me how to read people. I've prosecuted war criminals, defended soldiers facing court-martial, and negotiated with enemies who would have killed me if given half a chance. But nothing in my military career prepared me for the moment I stood at my own gate, watching 3 HOA representatives march up my driveway like they were conducting an inspection of government property. The woman in front, perfect blonde hair, designer suit that cost more than a private's monthly salary, smiled at me like I was a confused old veteran who didn't understand civilian life. That smile died the moment I looked at my watch and said, "You have 10 seconds to get off my property. 10, 9, 8. Her name was Deborah Hollis, president of the Ridgewood Estates Homeowners Association. I'd learn a lot more about her in the coming months, about the schemes she ran, the families she destroyed, the land she helped steal. But right then, in that moment, all I knew was that she represented everything I'd spent my career fighting against. Authority without legitimacy, power without accountability, the assumption that paperwork and corporate backing could crush anyone who stood in the way. "You can't threaten us," she snapped, her composure cracking just slightly around the edges. "I'm calling the police right now." 7, 6, 5. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone. The security guard behind her, a thick-necked man with a fake badge that said Ridgewood Estate Security, shifted his weight like he was considering whether to intervene. The clipboard clerk just stood there, mouth hanging open, probably wondering how a routine intimidation visit had gone sideways so fast. 4, 3, 2. "This is Deborah Hollis," she barked into the phone. "I need police at the Green property immediately. We have a threatening situation. An unstable elderly man is..." 1. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice, didn't reach for anything that could be construed as a weapon. Just stood there with my arms crossed, waiting. Judge, my old German shepherd, sat beside me, ears forward, watching the strangers with the same quiet intensity I'd learned to cultivate over nearly 3 decades of military law. The sheriff's cruiser arrived 11 minutes later. I knew it would be Marcus Webb behind the wheel before he even stepped out. Marcus and I went back 25 years to when he was a young MP and I was a JAG officer handling cases at Fort Bragg. We'd worked together, drunk together, buried friends together. He was one of the few people in this county I trusted completely. He walked up slowly, taking in the scene with the practiced eye of a man who'd seen every kind of trouble rural North Carolina could offer. Deborah immediately launched into her rehearsed complaint. Threatening behavior, hostile confrontation, unsafe conditions. Elderly man possibly suffering from some kind of episode. She made it sound like I'd pointed a rifle at her head instead of simply counting down from 10. Marcus listened without interrupting. Then he turned to me. "David, you want to tell me what's going on here?" "These folks showed up uninvited on my private property," I said calmly. "Demanded I tear down my fence within 48 hours. Claimed my land falls under their HOA jurisdiction. I asked them to leave. They refused, so I gave them a countdown." Marcus looked at Deborah. "Ma'am, can I see your documentation?" She handed over a folder with the triumphant air of someone producing classified evidence at a court-martial. Marcus flipped through it slowly. I watched his expression shift from neutral to confused to something that looked a lot like the irritation I remembered from our days dealing with incompetent officers who thought rank meant they could ignore regulations. "Ma'am," he said finally, "this property isn't in your jurisdiction. The Green family has held this land since 1947. It predates your development by over 70 years. These boundary claims you're making here, they're not valid." Deborah's face went pale beneath her perfect makeup. "That can't be right. Our legal team assured us." "Your legal team was wrong." Marcus handed back the folder with a finality that brooked no argument. I'm going to have to ask you to leave Mr. Green's property. Now, before I start considering whether to write up a trespassing report." "This isn't over," Deborah hissed at me as she retreated to her white SUV. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. We have resources you can't imagine." I watched her drive away, dust kicking up behind her tires, and felt something cold settle in my gut. The same feeling I used to get before a major operation went sideways. She was right about one thing. I didn't know who I was dealing with. Not yet, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. That night, I sat on my porch as the sun went down, painting the fields in shades of orange and gold that my wife Mary used to say looked like God was showing off his palette. The chair next to mine sat empty, the way it had for 4 years now. Sometimes I still talk to her anyway. Old habits die hard when you've loved someone for 41 years. "Well, Mary," I said to the evening air, "looks like we've got trouble coming. The kind that wears expensive suits and thinks it can take whatever it wants." The land stretched out before me, 80 acres of North Carolina soil that had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather, William Green, bought it in 1947 with money he'd saved from his army pay after coming home from the war. He'd fought across Europe, watched friends die on beaches and in forests, survived things he never talked about even decades later. When he finally came home, all he wanted was a piece of earth where things could grow instead of die. He built the farmhouse himself, board by board, nail by nail, learning carpentry from books and neighbors, because the army had only taught him how to destroy things. He married my grandmother on the front porch. Raised my father here. And when my father passed in 1991, he left it to me. I never intended to stay permanently. The military was my life for 28 years. JAG Corps, starting as a young lieutenant fresh out of law school and working my way up to full colonel before I retired. I prosecuted soldiers who'd committed crimes, defended those who'd been wrongly accused, advised commanders on everything from rules of engagement to prisoner treatment. I served in Germany, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan. I saw things that still wake me up at night sometimes, and I did things I'm proud of and things I wish I could take back. Then Mary got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they found it. The doctors at Walter Reed gave her 6 months. She lasted 14 because Mary was stubborn like that, stubborn in all the best ways. She'd been a military wife for 4 decades, raised our kids while I deployed to every corner of the globe, held our family together through separations that would have broken weaker partnerships. She wasn't about to let cancer dictate her timeline. We moved back to the farm for her final year. She said she wanted to die somewhere beautiful, somewhere with history, somewhere that felt like home even though she'd only visited during leaves and holidays throughout our marriage. Somewhere our grandchildren could visit and remember her. I held her hand under the old oak tree on a September morning when she finally let go. Buried her there, in the spot where she used to sit and read her books during those precious weeks we'd spent together over the years. Put up a small stone with her name and the words she'd asked for. Still home, still loved, still waiting. After that, I couldn't leave. The farm wasn't just property anymore. It was the last place I'd heard her laugh, the last place I'd seen her smile. The ground held her, and I wasn't about to let go of either. So I stayed, retired from the JAG Corps with full honors, a chest full of medals I never wore, and a lifetime of legal experience that would prove more valuable than I ever expected. Fixed up the old tractor that had been rusting in the barn since my father's time. Let Judge run through the fields every morning while I drank coffee on the porch and watched the mist rise off the pastures like ghosts dissolving in sunlight. It was supposed to be peaceful. It was supposed to be the quiet ending I'd earned after decades of service. But peace, I was learning, wasn't something the world just handed you. Sometimes you had to fight for it, and sometimes the enemy wore suits instead of uniforms. The trouble had started 3 months before Deborah showed up at my gate. That's when Ridgewood Estates finished construction, a sprawling development of identical houses with identical lawns and identical mailboxes, all perched on what used to be the Morrison farm about half a mile east of my property. The Morrisons had been my neighbors for as long as I could remember. Good people. Quiet. The kind of folks who'd bring you fresh eggs without being asked and help you fix a fence without expecting anything in return. Then one day they were gone, and the bulldozers moved in. I didn't think much of it at first. Progress, I told myself. Change. The world moves on whether you like it or not, and an old soldier ought to know that better than anyone. But then the letters started coming. The first one arrived in a cream-colored envelope with Ridgewood Estates Homeowners Association embossed in gold letters. Inside was a single page informing me that my property had been incorporated into the extended community zone, and that I was now subject to community aesthetic standards and maintenance requirements. The language was carefully vague, the kind of legal-sounding nonsense designed to intimidate people who didn't know better. I threw it in the trash. The second letter came 2 weeks later. This one had an invoice attached, $500 for failure to maintain consistent lawn appearance. My lawn was fine, my grass was cut, my fences were solid. But apparently, somewhere in their made-up rulebook, my property didn't meet their visual harmony standards. I threw that one in the trash too. The third letter was different. It came certified mail, requiring my signature. Inside was a formal demand that I remove unauthorized agricultural structures from my property within 30 days, or face escalating penalties and potential legal action. The unauthorized structures in question: my grandfather's barn, the one he'd built in 1952 with wood from trees he'd cleared himself. The one that had been standing on this land for over 70 years without bothering anyone. That's when I drove to the HOA office for the first time. The building was everything you'd expect from an organization that spent its energy telling people what color they could paint their mailboxes. Glass and chrome, aggressive air conditioning, a reception desk staffed by a young woman with a frozen smile and eyes that had given up on genuine human connection sometime around her second week on the job. "I'm here to see whoever's in charge," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I have questions about these letters your organization keeps sending me. Questions I'd like answered today." The receptionist's smile tightened. "I'll see if Ms. Hollis is available. Please have a seat." Deborah Hollis. I didn't know the name then, but I'd never forget it. She came out 15 minutes later, dressed like she was heading to a corporate board meeting, not running a neighborhood association for a housing development in rural North Carolina. "Mr. Green," she said, extending a manicured hand. "So nice to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you. A decorated military officer. How wonderful. Please come to my office." Her office was bigger than some courtrooms I'd argued in. Leather furniture, mahogany desk, framed certificates on the walls that meant nothing to anyone who knew how these things actually worked. A window behind her desk looked out over the Ridgewood Estates development like she was surveying a kingdom she'd conquered. "What can I do for you?" she asked, settling into her chair with practiced grace. I dropped the stack of letters on her desk. "You can explain why your organization is sending me violation notices for property that isn't part of your HOA and never has been." She didn't even look at the letters. Just smiled that smile I would come to hate. "Mr. Green, I understand this might be confusing. The legal landscape around property rights has evolved significantly in recent years. Community standards exist to protect property values for everyone in the area. Your rustic aesthetic, while charming in its way, affects the entire region's real estate potential. My land predates your development by 70 years. I never signed any agreement with your association. I'm not a member. You have no authority over my property." "None." "Times change, Mr. Green." Her smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. The county approved our expanded jurisdiction last year. Your property falls within our community impact zone. You can fight it, of course. Hire lawyers, spend years in court, drain your retirement savings on legal fees that will accomplish nothing. Or you can simply comply with reasonable community standards, and we can all be good neighbors. I stood up slowly. 28 years of reading liars across courtrooms and interrogation rooms had taught me exactly what I was looking at. This wasn't about lawn height or fence appearance or any of the other petty nonsense HOAs usually concerned themselves with. This was about something else entirely. Something bigger. Something worth fighting dirty for. Ms. Hollis, I said quietly, I've prosecuted war criminals. I've defended soldiers against false charges brought by people with a lot more power than you. I've gone up against generals, politicians, and corporations that could buy your little development 100 times over. I'm not scared of your letters, and I'm not selling my land. Have a nice day. I walked out without looking back, but I could feel her eyes on me the whole way, calculating, measuring, planning her next move. I'd seen that look before, on enemies who didn't know when they were outmatched. The next few weeks taught me exactly what kind of operation I was up against. The letters kept coming, but now they were joined by other forms of harassment. Anonymous complaints to the county fire marshal about my electrical wiring. A visit from animal control claiming someone had reported unsafe livestock conditions. A notice from the tax assessor's office saying my property was being reviewed for reassessment. A health inspector who showed up unannounced, claiming to have received reports of potential groundwater contamination. None of it amounted to anything substantive. The fire inspector found my wiring was up to code. The animal control officer spent 20 minutes petting Judge and left with a smile, telling me my dog was one of the best behaved he'd ever seen. The tax reassessment went nowhere because my property records were impeccable, documented and filed properly the way my father had taught me. The health inspector took water samples that came back clean. But that wasn't the point. The point was pressure, constant, unrelenting pressure designed to wear me down, exhaust me, make me think that selling was easier than fighting. It was a strategy I recognized from my years in the military. Psychological operations. Break the enemy's will without ever firing a shot. I started documenting everything, every letter, every visit, every suspicious vehicle that slowed down as it passed my gate. I installed cameras along my fence line, military-grade equipment that a friend from my service days helped me source. I photographed the Ridgewood security patrols that seemed to spend an unusual amount of time watching my property. I built a file the way I'd built cases for 28 years, piece by piece, fact by fact, evidence by evidence. Meanwhile, the harassment continued. Every few days brought some new annoyance. A notice about my mailbox being 3 inches too close to the road, a complaint about the color of my barn roof, an anonymous tip to the county about non-existent septic problems. Each one required phone calls, paperwork, time spent defending myself against imaginary violations. I kept a log of everything: dates, times, names, details. The prosecutor in me knew that documentation was ammunition. Every false complaint they filed was another piece of evidence for my eventual counterattack. Every harassment attempt was another count in whatever indictment might come. But what really made my blood boil was the surveillance. They were watching me now, openly, brazenly. A Ridgewood security vehicle would park at the edge of my property line and just sit there for hours. Different drivers, but always the same purpose. Intimidation. They wanted me to know I was being observed. They wanted me to feel surrounded, hunted, worn down. I photographed them right back. Every vehicle, every license plate, every face behind the wheel. If they wanted to play this game, I'd play it too. And unlike them, I knew how to build a case that would hold up in any court in the country. One morning, I found fresh tire tracks on my property near the fence line where my driveway meets the public road. Someone had been on my land overnight. Nothing appeared disturbed or stolen, but the message was clear. They could reach me anytime they wanted. They could violate my boundaries whenever they chose. That night, I installed motion-activated cameras with night vision capability and set up alerts that would wake me if anything larger than a raccoon moved within 50 yards of my fence line. From then on, nothing moved on my property without being recorded, time-stamped and stored in multiple secure locations. And that's when I found the document that changed everything. It was buried in the stack of HOA correspondence, a reference to Appendix D, Section 14 of something called the Green Property Integration Agreement. I'd never heard of any such agreement. I'd certainly never signed one. So I made a trip to the county records office to find out what the hell they were talking about. The clerk at the records office was a woman named Betty Chen, who'd been working there for 30 years. She didn't know me personally, but she knew my family name, knew the history of the green property, knew the kind of legacy my grandfather had built. "Mr. Green," she said when I explained what I was looking for. "Let me pull that up for you." Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Her eyebrows drew together. Then her face went pale. That's strange." "What is?" She turned the monitor so I could see. There it was. A document titled Green Property Integration Agreement, dated 2019, supposedly signed by my grandfather, William Green, agreeing to future HOA jurisdiction over the property and any future development easements that might be required. I felt something twist in my stomach. "Betty, my grandfather died in 1989, 30 years before this document was supposedly signed." She looked at the screen again, then at me, then back at the screen. Her hands were trembling slightly. "Mr. Green, I've been working here for 3 decades. I've never seen anything like this. This document shouldn't exist. Can you pull the original, the physical file?" 20 minutes later, she came back with a paper folder, dust clinging to the edges. Inside was a scan of the agreement. And there, at the bottom, was my grandfather's signature, except it wasn't. I'd seen my grandfather's signature 1,000 times. On birthday cards he'd sent me during my deployments, on legal documents for the property, on the letter he wrote me when I graduated from law school, the one I still kept in my desk drawer. The man had a distinctive hand, a sweeping W that looked almost like wings taking flight, followed by letters that flowed with the confidence of someone who'd learned to write before computers made handwriting obsolete. The signature on this document was flat, mechanical, clearly traced from some other source by someone who didn't know the old man well enough to capture his spirit. "They forged it," I said quietly. "They forged a dead man's signature, my grandfather's signature." Betty's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Mr. Green, I don't even know what this is. This is criminal." "I know exactly what it is," I said. "It's fraud. Federal fraud, given that it involves property rights and likely crosses state lines somewhere in the paperwork chain. And I'm going to prove it." I made copies of everything: the forged agreement, my grandfather's real signature from the original deed and from letters I had at home, the timeline that made it physically impossible for him to have signed anything in 2019. Then I went home and sat on my porch, staring at the papers until the sun went down and the stars came out. They'd forged my grandfather's signature. My grandfather, who'd built this place with his own hands after surviving a war that killed millions, who'd taught me how to fish in the creek that ran along the south boundary, who'd told me stories about sacrifice and honor and what it meant to build something that would outlast you, who'd held my grandmother's hand when she died and kept living because that's what soldiers do. They'd taken his name and used it like a tool to steal what he'd spent his life creating. The anger I felt wasn't hot. It was cold. Cold, impatient, and absolutely certain, the way I'd learned to be when prosecuting enemies of everything I believed in. I didn't know yet what Deborah Hollis and her HOA were really after, but I was going to find out. And then I was going to tear them apart the same way I'd torn apart every case I'd ever prosecuted. The phone call came 3 days later, from a number I recognized even after all these years. Marcus Webb, calling not on the sheriff's office line but on his personal cell. "David," he said when I answered, "we need to talk. Not on official channels. Can you meet me at the VFW hall tonight? Around 8. The VFW hall was mostly empty when I arrived. Just a few old-timers playing cards in the corner, and a bartender who'd served in Desert Storm wiping down glasses. Marcus was waiting in a back booth, a beer in front of him that he hadn't touched. "Thanks for coming," he said as I slid in across from him. "You sounded serious on the phone. What's going on?" Marcus glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot. "I've been doing some digging, quietly, off the books. What I found... David, this is bigger than an HOA power trip." "A lot bigger. Tell me." He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "Ridgewood Estates is a front. The development company behind it is called Meridian Properties, run by a man named Warren Bradshaw, real estate developer out of Charlotte. Made his money in commercial properties, strip malls, office complexes. But lately, he's been moving into something else." "What kind of something else?" "Infrastructure. Specifically, pipeline easements." Marcus tapped the folder. "There's a natural gas pipeline being planned. Runs from the coast to the interior, supposed to serve half the state. The route they want to use cuts right through this county. And guess whose land sits directly in the path?" My stomach dropped. "Mine. Yours, and about a dozen other properties in the area. The pipeline company needs easement rights, permanent access to run their lines across private land. Most of the other property owners have already sold out or signed easement agreements. You're one of the last holdouts. How much are we talking about?" "The easement deal for your 80 acres. $28 million. $28 million. I stared at the number, trying to process it. That wasn't just money. That was the kind of money that made people do terrible things. The kind of money that could buy politicians, corrupt officials, forge documents, destroy families. So the HOA harassment, the fake jurisdiction claims, the forged agreement, all designed to pressure you into selling, or failing that, to establish some kind of legal claim on your property that would let them force the easement through even without your consent. They've done it before, David. I found records of at least 6 other families in the region who sold their land to Meridian Properties in the last 3 years. Every single one of them had code violations and HOA disputes right before they sold. Every single one sold below market value. And Deborah Hollis? She's on Bradshaw's payroll, has been for years. She's not running an HOA. She's running a land acquisition operation disguised as a neighborhood association. The whole development, Ridgewood Estates, it's just cover. A way to establish community standards that give them leverage over surrounding properties. I sat back, absorbing the scope of what I was hearing. This wasn't harassment. This was a criminal conspiracy. Fraud, forgery, possibly RICO violations if the pattern was clear enough. These people weren't just bullies. They were predators, systematically targeting property owners and using every dirty trick in the book to steal their land. "There's one more thing," Marcus said. He pulled out a single photograph and slid it across the table. This was taken last month at a fundraiser in Charlotte. "Recognize anyone?" The photo showed Warren Bradshaw, silver-haired and smiling in an expensive suit, shaking hands with a man I recognized immediately. The county commissioner, the man who would have approved any jurisdictional changes that let the HOA expand its reach. "They've got people inside the government," I said. at multiple levels. I don't know how deep it goes, but I know it's not just local. This kind of operation, the money involved, the coordination, this is organized, professional. I looked at my old friend, seeing the worry lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. Why are you telling me this, Marcus? Why not just handle it through official channels? Because I don't know who I can trust in official channels anymore. Because the last person who tried to investigate Meridian Properties had their career destroyed. Because you're the best prosecutor I ever worked with, and if anyone can build a case that will actually stick, it's you. He was right, and we both knew it. I need more evidence, I said. Documents, financial records, proof of the connection between the HOA and Meridian Properties. I'm working on it. But David, there's something else you should know. He hesitated. There's someone inside the HOA who's been asking questions. Quietly. A woman named Jenny Rawlins works as their administrative assistant. She came to my office last week, anonymous tip line, said she had information about irregularities in their operations. Wouldn't say more, but she seemed scared. Really scared. Jenny Rawlins. I filed the name away. An insider with a guilty conscience could be invaluable, but she could also be a trap. Set up a meeting, I said. Somewhere safe, somewhere they can't trace. You sure? If they find out you're talking to her, then they'll escalate. Good, let them. The more they push, the more mistakes they'll make, and mistakes are evidence. Marcus nodded slowly. You really haven't changed, have you? Still the same stubborn son of a bitch who wouldn't back down from a case no matter how dangerous it got. I learned from the best. My grandfather built this land with his hands. My wife is buried on it. I'll be damned if I let a bunch of corporate criminals take it from me. Whatever they're planning, whatever they think they can do, I've faced worse. And I'm still standing. We shook hands. Two old soldiers who'd fought different wars but understood the same truths. Some battles you choose. Some battles choose you. And some things are worth fighting for no matter the cost. The meeting with Jenny Rawlins happened 4 days later, in a diner 40 miles from Ridgewood, far enough that we wouldn't be seen by anyone connected to the HOA. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a back booth, a cup of coffee in front of her that she'd clearly been nursing for a while. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of face that showed every emotion whether she wanted it to or not. Right now, that face showed fear. Real, genuine fear. Mr. Green, she asked as I slid into the booth across from her. That's me, and you're Jenny Rawlins. She nodded, glancing around nervously. I shouldn't be here. If they find out I talked to you, they won't find out. Not from me, not from Sheriff Webb. Whatever you tell me stays between us until you're ready for it to go further. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, as if trying to draw warmth from it. I've worked for the HOA for 2 years. At first, I thought it was just a normal job. Filing paperwork, answering phones, scheduling meetings. But then I started noticing things. What kind of things? Payments that didn't make sense, invoices from companies I couldn't find online, meeting minutes that were edited after the fact. And the property files? She took a shaky breath. Mr. Green, they have files on every property owner within 10 miles of Ridgewood. Detailed files. Financial information, family situations, vulnerabilities. It's not normal HOA stuff. It's like dossiers, intelligence files. Including me? Including you, your military record, your wife's medical history, your children's addresses. They know everything about you. I kept my face neutral, but inside I felt a cold fury building. They'd researched Mary. They'd dug into her medical records, her death. They'd turned her suffering into data points for their operation. What else? I asked quietly. Jenny reached into her purse and pulled out a USB drive. I copied what I could. Financial records, emails between Ms. Hollis and someone named Bradshaw, meeting notes about problem properties and acquisition timelines. It's not everything, but it's enough to show what they're really doing. I took the drive carefully. Why? Why are you risking yourself like this? She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. My grandmother owned a farm about 20 miles from here. Small place, nothing special, but it was hers. She'd lived there her whole life. 3 years ago, she started getting letters from an HOA she'd never heard of. Violation notices, fines, threats. She was 84 years old and scared out of her mind. Jenny wiped her eyes. She sold the property for a quarter of what it was worth just to make it stop. 6 months later, she was gone. Doctor said it was her heart, but I know what really killed her. Those people killed her, and I helped them do it. You didn't know. I should have. I should have asked questions, should have paid attention. Instead, I just did my job and collected my paycheck while they destroyed people's lives. She looked at me with something like desperation. I can't undo what happened to my grandmother, but maybe I can stop them from doing it to anyone else. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Jenny, what you're doing right now, giving me this information, that takes more courage than most people ever show. Your grandmother would be proud of you. She gave me a watery smile. Just promise me you'll stop them. Promise me. I promise. Over the next 2 weeks, I went through the files Jenny had given me with the methodical precision I developed over 28 years of military law. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The scope of their operation was staggering. They had systematized land theft the way corporations systematize production. There were flow charts for harassment campaigns, timelines for escalation, risk assessments for different types of property owners, contingency plans for legal pushback, media attention, and what they called resilient targets, landowners who didn't fold under initial pressure. I was classified as a resilient target. The file they'd compiled on me was chillingly thorough. They had my complete military record, including deployments I'd thought were classified. They'd mapped out my financial situation. They'd researched Mary's cancer treatment costs to see if I might be carrying medical debt they could exploit. They knew when I woke up, when I went to sleep, who visited my property. But the most damning documents were the communications between Deborah Hollis and Warren Bradshaw. Emails discussing specific families by name, planning how to accelerate their timeline to compliance. Messages about payments to county officials. References to the pipeline easement deal and the obstacles that needed to be removed. In one email, Bradshaw wrote, "The Green property is the last significant holdout. The pipeline consortium is getting impatient. Apply maximum pressure. I don't care what it takes." Deborah's response. "Understood. We've already initiated Phase 4. If he doesn't break soon, we'll move to environmental intervention." Environmental intervention, I'd learn what that meant soon enough. 3 nights later, Judge started barking at 2:30 a.m. Not his usual alert bark, but the deep, furious sound that meant genuine threat. I was out of bed and at my security monitors in seconds. 2 figures were moving along my southern fence line, hunched over, clearly trying to avoid detection. One carried a bag. The other had what looked like a shovel. I grabbed my phone, hit record on my security system, and slipped out the back door. Moving through the darkness of my own property was second nature. I'd walked these fields in daylight and darkness for years. I circled wide, using the barn for cover, approaching from an angle they wouldn't expect. I got within 30 yards before I could make out details. One of them was digging a shallow hole near my fence. The other was pulling items from a bag. Glass containers, what looked like dead animals, some kind of powder or chemical. I raised my phone and kept recording. They worked for about 10 minutes, burying everything carefully, then covering the disturbed earth and spreading leaves over it to hide their work. When they finished, they slipped away through a gap in my fence that they'd clearly used before. I waited until they were gone, then walked to the spot and marked it with a stake. I didn't touch what they'd buried. I knew better than that. Tampering with evidence was a rookie mistake, and I hadn't been a rookie in 3 decades. The next morning, I called Marcus and told him what I'd witnessed. He came out with an EPA inspector he trusted, a woman named Janet Wu who'd been fighting environmental crimes for 20 years and had no patience for corporate bullshit. They dug up the burial site carefully, documenting everything. Inside, they found empty pesticide containers, dead birds, and soil samples that had been contaminated with chemicals no farmer in their right mind would use. "They were setting you up," Janet said, her voice tight with anger. If we'd received an anonymous tip about environmental violations and come out here without knowing the context, we would have cited you. Maybe shut down your farm. Definitely tied you up in regulatory hell for years. "But you have the video," Marcus said. "Time-stamped footage of them planting this evidence." "I have everything," I confirmed, "and I'm ready to use it." Janet looked at me with something like respect. "Mr. Green, I've been dealing with corporate environmental crimes for 2 decades. This is one of the most blatant cases of evidence tampering I've ever seen. I'm not citing you, I'm reporting them, and I'm recommending federal involvement." Federal involvement. The words hung in the air like a promise. This had escalated beyond county politics and HOA harassment. This was now a matter for the FBI. The call from Special Agent Maria Santos came 3 days later. She wanted to meet. She wanted to see my evidence. She wanted to talk about Warren Bradshaw. We met at her office in Raleigh, a nondescript building that housed the Bureau's regional white-collar crime unit. Santos was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s with the sharp eyes and controlled demeanor of someone who'd built a career on catching people who thought they were too smart to get caught. "Colonel Green," she said, using my military rank in a way that told me she'd done her homework. "Thank you for coming in. I'm retired. Just David is fine." She smiled slightly. "David, then." "I've been going through the materials you and Sheriff Webb compiled. I have to say, it's some of the most thorough preliminary investigation I've ever seen from a civilian. 28 years in the JAG Corps. Old habits die hard. So I've heard. Your reputation precedes you." She leaned forward. "David, we've been watching Meridian Properties for over a year. Warren Bradshaw has been connected to suspicious land acquisitions across 3 states, but we've never been able to get enough evidence to move on him. The man is careful. He uses layers of shell companies, intermediaries, deniability at every level. Until now, what you've assembled, the forged documents, the financial records, the evidence tampering, the testimony from Jenny Rawlins, it's exactly what we've been looking for. A clear chain connecting Bradshaw directly to criminal activity. So what happens next?" Santos stood and walked to her window, looking out at the Raleigh skyline. "We build the case. Carefully. We don't want to spook them into destroying evidence or fleeing the jurisdiction. We need them confident, complacent, convinced that their system is still working. You want me to keep playing along. I want you to let them think they're winning. Let them escalate. Let them make more mistakes. Every move they make gives us more evidence. And when we have enough, when the case is airtight..." She turned back to face me. "We take them all down at once. Bradshaw, Hollis, everyone in their network." I thought about it. It went against every instinct I had to let these people continue operating, continue harassing me and others, continue thinking they were untouchable. But I'd prosecuted enough cases to know she was right. A rushed case led to acquittals. A thorough case led to convictions. How long? Weeks, maybe a couple of months. We need to trace the money, identify all the players, make sure no one slips through. And in the meantime, I just sit there and take it? No. Santos smiled, and there was something predatory in it that I recognized from my own reflection on good days. In the meantime, you prepare the battlefield. When we're ready to move, I want you there. I want them to know who brought them down. I thought about Mary, about my grandfather, about Jenny's grandmother and all the other families who'd been destroyed by these predators. I thought about the land that had held my family for 3 generations and would hold them for 3 more if I had anything to say about it. Tell me what you need, I said, and let's get these bastards. The next 6 weeks were a masterclass in controlled patience. I continued documenting every harassment attempt, every threatening letter, every surveillance vehicle that parked near my property. I let them think their pressure was working, that I was weakening, that surrender was just around the corner. Deborah Hollis seemed to believe she was winning. Her letters became more aggressive, her demands more outrageous. She started showing up personally for inspections, walking along my fence line with her clipboard carrying minions, pointing at things and taking notes like she was cataloging deficiencies in a military barracks. I played the part of a tired old man slowly being ground down. I let my voice show frustration when I argued with her. I let my shoulders slump slightly when she delivered new violation notices. I even accidentally mentioned to a neighbor, knowing it would get back to her, that I was considering whether fighting was worth it anymore. Meanwhile, Agent Santos and her team were building a case that would destroy Meridian Properties from the foundation up. They traced financial transactions through shell companies in 3 states. They identified 14 county officials who'd received payments from Bradshaw-connected entities. They documented a pattern of land acquisition that stretched back almost a decade, involving dozens of families who'd been forced off their property through the same tactics being used against me. The evidence was overwhelming, but Santos wanted one more thing: a confession, direct admission of criminal intent from Bradshaw or Hollis, the kind of smoking gun that would make any jury conviction inevitable. I knew exactly how to get it. I called Deborah's office and asked for a meeting, told her I was ready to discuss options, told her the pressure was too much, that I couldn't keep fighting, that I needed to know what kind of offer they were really prepared to make. The receptionist practically purred with satisfaction when she scheduled the appointment. But I didn't want to meet at her office. I wanted her to come to me, to my land, to the place she'd been trying to steal. I'd like to do this at my property, I told her when she called to confirm. One last walk around the place before I let it go. I think I've earned that, don't you? She hesitated. I could almost hear her calculating the risks, weighing her eagerness to close the deal against the possibility of a trap. But ego won out. It always does with people like her. Of course, Mr. Green. I understand. I'll bring some paperwork for you to review. Tomorrow at 2. Tomorrow at 2. That night I prepared the battlefield the way I'd prepared for 100 legal battles over the years, cameras positioned to capture every angle. Recording equipment hidden but ready. Santos and her team staged half a mile down the road, waiting for my signal. Marcus Webb on standby with arrest warrants already signed and sealed. The stage was set. All that remained was the performance. Deborah arrived exactly at 2 o'clock. Punctuality as power, a psychological trick I'd seen 1,000 times. She stepped out of her white SUV looking like she was attending a victory celebration, not finalizing a land theft. Behind her came Warren Bradshaw himself, silver-haired and smooth in a suit that probably cost more than some people's monthly mortgage payments, radiating the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences for anything in his life. 2 Ridgewood security guards brought up the rear, big men with small minds, there for intimidation rather than actual protection. I was waiting on the porch, a pitcher of iced tea I had no intention of offering sitting on the railing beside me. Mr. Green, Deborah said as she approached, that familiar smile firmly in place. "Thank you so much for being reasonable about this. I know it's been a difficult process, but I really believe this is the best outcome for everyone. Let's talk inside." I led them into the farmhouse, into the living room where my grandfather's furniture still sat exactly where he'd placed it, decades ago. Deborah looked around with barely concealed contempt, probably already planning what she'd bulldoze first. Bradshaw's eyes were colder, more calculating, assessing the property like a predator assessing prey. "So," Deborah said, settling into a chair like she owned it, "you're ready to discuss terms?" "I'm ready to hear what you have to say." Warren Bradshaw spoke for the first time. He had the smooth voice of a man who'd spent his life convincing people to trust him against their better judgment. "David, may I call you David? Let me be straightforward with you. Your property is valuable to our development plans. The location is ideal for certain infrastructure projects we're pursuing. We're prepared to offer you $600,000 for immediate sale. Cash, no contingencies." $600,000. For land worth 3 times that in a normal market, and worth $28 million in pipeline easement rights that they planned to sell the moment they owned it. "And if I say no?" Deborah leaned forward, dropping any pretense of friendliness. "David, let's be honest with each other. You can't win this fight. You're facing over $100,000 in accumulated HOA fines. We've documented environmental violations that could cost you the property entirely. We have connections at every level of county government. We can make your life very, very difficult for as long as we need to." "Connections like Commissioner Harris?" I asked. "The one I have a photo of shaking hands with Mr. Bradshaw at a fundraiser?" Bradshaw's smile flickered, just slightly. "Or connections like the clerk at the county records office who processed a forged document with my dead grandfather's signature on it?" Now Deborah's smile was gone entirely. "Or maybe connections like the 2 men I recorded on video burying fake evidence on my property 3 weeks ago?" The room went very quiet. I watched the blood drain from Deborah's face, watched Bradshaw's mask of confidence crack to reveal something uglier underneath. "You're bluffing," Bradshaw said. But his voice had lost its smoothness. "Warren, I spent 28 years as a military prosecutor. I've put away people who are smarter than you, more powerful than you, and a hell of a lot more careful than you. I don't bluff. I build cases." I leaned forward. "And right now, I have a case that's going to put both of you in federal prison for the rest of your lives." I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Standing on my porch were Agent Maria Santos and 4 FBI agents in tactical vests. Behind them, coming up the driveway, were 3 more vehicles, Sheriff Marcus Webb's cruiser leading the way. "Warren Bradshaw," Santos announced, stepping into the room with her badge held high. "Deborah Hollis. You're both under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, and criminal violation of federal land use statutes. You have the right to remain silent." What happened next was something I'd waited months to see. Warren Bradshaw's composure shattered completely. The silver-haired executive who destroyed dozens of families, who'd bribed officials and forged documents and stolen land from people who'd worked it for generations, looked around wildly for an escape route. He spotted the back door and lunged for it, shoving past Deborah, knocking over a lamp that had belonged to my grandmother. He made it 3 steps before his foot caught on the edge of my grandfather's coffee table. He went down hard, face first into the hardwood floor that William Green had laid with his own hands in 1952. The impact was substantial. I heard the crack of his nose breaking, saw blood immediately start pooling on the wood. "Don't move," I said, stepping on his hand as he tried to push himself up. Not hard enough to cause injury, but hard enough to make the point. "You're not running anywhere, Warren. Not anymore." He whimpered. Actually, whimpered. This man who'd signed orders to destroy families, who'd casually approved schemes that had driven people to bankruptcy and despair, who'd treated human lives like obstacles to be removed. lay on my floor, bleeding and whimpering like a kicked dog. I stepped over him without another word and walked outside to watch the rest of the operation unfold. But the best part, the part I would remember for the rest of my life, was Deborah Hollis. As the agents moved to handcuff her, she started screaming. About her lawyers, about her connections, about how dare they touch her. She twisted away from the first agent who reached for her, stumbling backward through the doorway, teetering on her ridiculous designer heels. She made it to the edge of the porch before her right heel caught on a gap between the boards. The heels snapped clean off, and Deborah Hollis, the woman who'd terrorized an entire county, went tumbling down the porch steps like a sack of grain. She landed in the mud at the bottom. We'd had rain the night before, and the ground at the base of the stairs was soft and wet and absolutely filthy. Her white blazer was instantly brown. Her perfect blonde hair was plastered with North Carolina clay. Her remaining heel snapped off as she struggled to stand, and she went down again, this time landing on her hands and knees in the muck. When she finally managed to stand, supported by two agents who clearly weren't being gentle about it, she looked like a drowned cat. Mascara ran down her cheeks in black rivers. Mud covered her from chest to knee. One of her shoes was completely gone, lost somewhere in the mess. She was shaking, whether from cold or fury or fear, I couldn't tell. I walked down the porch steps slowly, savoring every moment. The woman who'd forged my grandfather's signature, who'd researched my wife's medical records, who'd tried to plant evidence to destroy my farm, who'd broken an 84-year-old woman's heart until it stopped beating. I stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up at me. "You know what your mistake was?" I asked quietly. "You thought I was just a tired old veteran who'd scare easy. You thought paperwork and pressure would break me. You forgot to check who you were dealing with." "This isn't over," she hissed, mud dripping from her hair. "I know people. I have connections. You can't—" "Deborah," I cut her off. "I've prosecuted war criminals. I've gone up against enemies of this nation who would have eaten you for breakfast. They all said the same thing you're saying now. They were all wrong. And so are you." Agent Santos appeared beside me. "Get them processed," she said to her team. "And make sure Mr. Bradshaw gets medical attention for that nose. We want him healthy enough to stand trial." As they led Deborah toward the waiting vehicles, I called after her. "Remember what I told you the first day you showed up at my gate? I gave you 10 seconds to leave. You should have taken them." She didn't respond. She just stumbled forward between the agents, a broken woman covered in mud, her empire crumbling around her. The arrests made the news that night. Local stations first, then state, then national, when the scope of the conspiracy became clear. 23 properties across 4 states, $31 million in fraudulent acquisitions, a network of corrupted officials, forged documents, and systematic harassment that had displaced dozens of families from land their ancestors had worked for generations. The footage of Warren Bradshaw being led out of my farmhouse with blood streaming from his broken nose played on every major network. The image of Deborah Hollis covered in mud, her designer suit ruined and her face streaked with mascara and clay, became the defining picture of the case. Social media had a field day. Someone created a meme of her muddy face with the caption, "When you try to steal a JAG officer's land." It went viral within hours. I refused most interview requests. I wasn't in this for attention or celebrity. But I did agree to one appearance, a local news segment where I could explain what had happened and warn other property owners about the tactics these predators used. "They count on you giving up," I told the camera. "They count on you being too tired, too scared, too overwhelmed to fight back. But here's what they don't understand. Some things are worth fighting for no matter the cost. And when you push someone far enough, when you threaten everything they love, you don't break them. You wake them up." The trial took 7 months. I testified for 4 days, walking the jury through every piece of evidence, every connection, every lie. Jenny Rollins testified too, her voice steady despite her obvious fear, describing what she'd witnessed inside the HOA operation. Marcus Webb presented the law enforcement evidence. Agent Santos walked the jury through the federal investigation. The defense tried everything: character assassination, technical objections, claims of entrapment. None of it worked. The evidence was too solid, the pattern too clear, the crimes too well documented. The verdicts came down on a Thursday afternoon in October, almost exactly a year after Deborah Hollis first showed up at my gate, demanding I tear down my grandfather's fence. Deborah Hollis, guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first date. Warren Bradshaw, guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, plus $2.3 million in restitution to his victims. 7 other defendants, including the county commissioner and 2 state officials who'd taken bribes, received sentences ranging from 3 to 10 years. The Ridgewood Estates HOA was dissolved by court order. Every property integration agreement they'd created was voided. 11 families got their land back through civil proceedings that followed the criminal trial, including the family of Jenny Rollins' grandmother. The property was returned to Jenny herself, who'd inherited it after her grandmother's death. And I got something that couldn't be measured in dollars or years. I got to stay. The day after the sentencing, I walked out to Mary's memorial under the old oak tree. The leaves were changing, gold and red against a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Judge walked beside me, slower than he used to be, his muzzle gray now, but still alert, still watching over me the way he'd been doing for 12 years. I sat down in the grass next to her stone and told her everything, the whole story from beginning to end. The threats and the pressure and the fear, the allies who showed up when I needed them. The moment when everything came together and the people who'd tried to steal our home finally faced justice. They thought they could take it, Mary, I said. All of it. The house, the fields, even the ground where you rest. But they forgot something important. They forgot that some things are worth fighting for. They forgot that some people don't break no matter how hard you push. They forgot who they were dealing with. The wind rustled through the oak leaves, and for just a moment I could almost hear her voice. Still home, she seemed to say. Still ours. Still loved. I reached out and touched the stone, feeling the sun-warm surface under my fingers. Yeah, I said quietly. Still home. Always. The next spring I put up a new sign at the entrance to the property. Hand-carved from oak that had fallen in a storm, the way my grandfather would have done it. It read, Green Family Farm. Established, 1947, still standing below it in smaller letters. I added a message for anyone who might drive past and wonder about the old veteran on the 80 acres who'd refused to give up. Some land isn't for sale. Some lines can't be crossed. Some people don't fold. Jenny Rollins came by that summer. She'd taken a job with a non-profit that helped families facing predatory land acquisition, using what she'd learned about the enemy to protect future victims. She looked different than she had that day in the diner, more confident, less afraid. I wanted to thank you, she said as we sat on the porch drinking iced tea, for believing in me, for giving me a chance to make things right. You made things right yourself, I told her. I just provided the opportunity. What you did took more courage than most people ever show. My grandmother would have liked you, Jenny said. She was stubborn too. Used to say the land has a memory. It remembers who worked it, who loved it, who fought for it. I thought about that after she left. Land with memory. Maybe there was truth in it. Maybe the soil under our feet really did hold on to something of the people who came before, their struggles and their victories, their losses and their loves. I like to think my grandfather was still here somehow, in the fence posts he set, and the barn he built, and the floors where his great-grandson had finally stopped a man who'd spent his life destroying everything people like William Green had built. I like to think Mary was here too, in the garden she'd planned to plant and never got the chance to, in the porch where she used to sit and read, in the air itself. They had tried to take it all. Deborah Hollis and Warren Bradshaw, and everyone else who saw this land as nothing more than an obstacle to their profits. They had brought lawyers and threats and forged documents and planted evidence. They had used every weapon in their arsenal, every dirty trick in their playbook. And they had lost. Not because I was smarter or richer or more powerful. Not because I had better lawyers or more influential friends. They lost because I refused to quit. They lost because 28 years in the JAG Corps had taught me how to fight battles that mattered. They lost because some things are worth fighting for no matter the cost. They lost because when you push a man who has nothing left to lose, a man who's already buried the love of his life and made peace with his own mortality, a man who learned everything he knows about justice from putting away people far more dangerous than real estate developers, there's no pressure you can apply that will break him. I sat on my porch as another sunset painted the sky, watching the colors shift and change the way they had for 3 generations of greens. Judge lay at my feet, dreaming whatever old dogs dream about. The fields stretched out before me, green turning gold in the fading light, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the creek running along the south boundary, the same sound my grandfather heard when he first walked this land almost 80 years ago. Warren Bradshaw was in federal prison, his business empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed. Deborah Hollis was in a cell of her own, her designer suits traded for orange jumpsuits, her power reduced to choosing which book to read from the prison library. The county officials who'd taken their bribes were facing their own sentences, their careers and legacies ruined by their own greed. Justice. It wasn't always fast, and it wasn't always pretty, but sometimes, if you were willing to fight for it, if you refused to give up no matter how hard they pushed, justice won. I raised my glass of iced tea in a silent toast to the land, to my grandfather, to Mary, to everyone who'd helped me win a war I never asked for, but was always prepared to fight. We did it, I said to the evening air. We held the line. And somewhere, in the rustle of leaves and the cry of distant birds and the endless patience of soil that had waited 80 years for justice, I could almost hear them answering, yes, yes we did. Some battles you choose, some battles choose you. And some things are worth fighting for until your last breath. This land, this legacy, this line in the dirt that my grandfather drew and my father defended, and I would die before surrendering. Still standing, still home, always.